Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink with a card for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge. I get a lot of questions about color combos and how to know what colors to use, or you get stuck in a rut and always go for the same thing. I highly recommend the Color Throwdown Challenge. This is one of, I'm sure there's tons of inspiration and tons of different challenges out there. This one I've just been a part of for a lot of years, and there's no stress, there's no anyone can play along, and it's just for fun and inspiration, and it always gets me thinking outside the box, always. So I will have a link to it, like I always do, in my blog post, which is linked below the video. So to start off with, I have some Canson XL watercolor paper, and I pulled out several of my distress spray stains and oxide sprays, and I was just experimenting. I wanted to create just panels of colors that I could then die cut to make a sunflower. So I did this piece first, and I used mustard seed distress spray stain, and then I added some fossilized amber and wild honey distress oxide spray on top, just kind of drying between the layers so that I'd get that splattery texture, all of that going on. And then I did the same thing with this scrap, this time using brushed corduroy distress spray stain. And then I'll add some hickory smoke distress oxide spray. So the spray stains are pure liquid. They are very intense colors. The oxide sprays have pigments in them, so they need to be shaken up. And by shaken, I mean you basically ring them like a bell. You don't want to shake the bottles up and down because you can end up with a lot of leaks that way. And they both have their own uses. You could, if you don't have the sprays, you could do the ink smushing, with oxide inks and regular distress inks, whatever floats your boats. You can use what you've got. I've got all the sprays and I love playing with them, so that's what I was using today. But you could totally do ink smushing and get, color your own panels that way. Again, whatever works for you. So I did that, and then this last one I used hickory smoke distress spray stain, and then on top of it I added the hickory smoke distress oxide spray, just playing. And I was working the whole time in my splat box. I had a piece of paper towel there. You can see how much it just soaks up, because otherwise it just makes a big mess. And then speeding up the drying with my heat tool. When everything was dry, I die cut all those pieces using the Sunflower Petals wafer die set from Simon Says Stamp. And the leaves are from the Detailed Rose wafer die. So everything was die cut. And I also had die cut a circle from just copy paper using the Sunflower Petals, the largest kind of flower center wafer die. You could die cut it from anything. I chose copy paper because it just doesn't add any extra bulk, because this flower ends up being quite bulky because I add all the petals. I just die cut that whole panel just over and over again because the wafer dies for the petals, there's 4. So I just kept going until I used up the entire panel. So I've got this little stack, of petals, which I love because it, gave it the fullness. So I used my craft tacky glue and just kind of kept going around in that circle there till I had all those petals adhered. And then I adhered the 2 pieces for the center, stuck that on top, and then put some acrylic blocks on top of that just to hold it all down and let that glue dry. So then for the next piece, I'm using some navy cardstock. I use my anti-static powder tool. And then I have this soft plaid background. I have it face up. I inked it up with my clear embossing ink. I'd use the anti-static powder tool on the navy cardstock, flip that onto the stamp, and then just pressed it down with my fingers. And then I'm using Prize Ribbon Distress Embossing Glaze. I was just curious because I've used these glazes in other videos, and I've said they're tinted, but they're still transparent. When this is heated on this navy cardstock, it ends up looking almost black, which was kind of cool. You could just do clear embossing powder So it'd just be like the shine, you know, tone on tone. This ends up being a little bit darker, and I like it. I don't know, these embossing glazes are fun to play with. So again, use whatever, you know, whatever floats your boat. But I just wanted that pattern and that texture, and then the shine of the embossing powder. I'd missed a spot when I'd stamped it, but when I'm done die cutting it, I was able to like die cut out the spot I missed. I used one of Simon's basic rectangle wafer dies, as well as one of the nested domed arches, because all I really want is just the frame. So that in the interior domed arch, I'll save for, you know, a different project. And then off camera, I had die cut some smoke cardstock with the Simply Thank You wafer dies, and I'd stacked it together. So there are 3 layers adhered together to give it that dimension that I like. And then I am just blending Hickory Smoke Distress ink on top of this, just to get it a little closer to the colors of the leaves, but also give it a little more dimension, because I'm keeping the ink more concentrated to the bottom of these words. I'm just using a little mini ink blending brush here and just working on some scrap paper and blending that ink onto there, but then adding more ink towards the bottom of all of these words, so that it gives that little bit of an ombre look, but also just helps it to stand out a little bit more. So once I was kind of happy with how those sentiments were looking, I'm only going to use the words. I'm not going to use the outline, because rather than having the words stacked on top of each other, I'm going to put them side by side. So I have my card base, and I've cleaned off that soft plaid background, and I've masked off where the score line is on my card base with my trusty piece of Post-it tape. I keep reusing the same one until it gets too gunked up to use anymore. I just stick it to a container on my desk. And like I said, I just keep reusing it until it gets too full of, you know, dust and ink and whatever. So mask that off so I don't stamp past the score line. And I inked up the stamp with Simon's Fog ink. So it's very subtle, but I've got that pattern that I love. And then the sentiments are from that new Missing You stamp set. And I decided I would stamp each part of the sentiment in a different color. I don't always do this, but since they were already on like individual stamps, I was like, why not? So the sending I inked up with Fossilized Amber Distress Oxide ink. And then I lined up the word hugs, and that I'm going to ink up with Hickory Smoke Distress Oxide ink. And then after I stamped that, the final little sentiment, I had to mask off part of it. And I just used a piece of my like Spellbinders washi tape to do that. So I lined up that sentiment. I'm going to mask off the part that I don't want, and then the rest I'm going to ink up with Prize Ribbon Distress Oxide ink, and then remove that mask, and then stamp that on the inside of the card. So now the inside's done. It's time to adhere everything to the outside. I was originally going to pop this like frame up with foam tape, but then I realized if I did that, I would have to fiddle with the sentiments as well and put little pieces of foam tape or do more die cutting. You know, it would have been fiddly, and I was like, nope, not doing it. So I adhered the frame to the card base, and then I figured out where I wanted my leaves to go under the sunflower. And then you can see where I'm going to put the sentiment. And that's why I didn't want to fiddle with the foam tape. So I figured out where the leaves were going to go. And the easiest way to do this was I just kind of held each leaf in place, flipped over that little sunflower, and then just taped each of those leaves with that same washi tape, so that I'm not having to adhere all these random little pieces all at once, or like individually. So once I was happy with kind of the placement of everything, then I just put glue on the back of this entire piece, and I can adhere this to my card. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put on the adhesive. I'm going to get it in place on the card front, and then I just stuck the acrylic blocks on top of it just to hold everything down and let this dry onto the card front. And then I adhered the sentiment there. So now everything's adhered, and I'm going to add some splatter because, you know, it's tradition. I have some Fossilized Amber Distress paint. I do prefer the paints versus using like inks for splattering. A lot of times inks will kind of spread a little bit. It's a subtle thing, but I notice it and it bugs me sometimes. Sometimes I don't care, but sometimes it bugs me how the splotches of ink that I splatter will kind of spread, and they don't stay kind of uniform, if that makes any sense at all. So I do prefer the paints. And besides, it gives me an excuse to use them because I've got like every color of distress paint. Anyway. I did the splatter. So I splattered that paint, let that dry. And then I pulled out some Trinity Stamps Midnight Ball Embellishment Mix. These look black. And online they look completely crazy. But they're gorgeous. They honestly, they look like an oil slick. You know, like the color of them, like they're a very deep blue, almost black, with that reflect to them, and they were kind of perfect because they were the closest to kind of go with that dark blue of this combo. So I sprinkled those around this card, and then I'm going to adhere them into place with little dabs of craft tacky glue using my little embellishment wand to press them into place. And then once those are adhered, I'm going to pair this card with one of Simon's Dandelion envelopes just to get a little bit of a brighter yellow, just for a fun little pop of color. And that finished off this card. So I've got like texture and splatter and shine and just all the fun things. And as always, like I said, I will have a link to the Color Throwdown Challenge in my blog post. I will also have, of course, a supply list. I'll link to all the supplies I used, so you can check that out below the video in the description box if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting, all of it. I very much appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.